Oh, the humanity. Here's the story. Max Verstappen will start on second, not on pole tomorrow. Here's what's happened over the past half an hour, 60 minutes or less. Anthony Davidson had the discussion on the Sky Sports F1 broadcast with Christian Horner and said Maximilian Verstappen is unlikely to get penalised, though they were investigating it. The FIA issued the following. They said driver and team representative of car number 1 are required to report to stewards at 23:15. That was circa 60 minutes ago. In relation to the incident below, driver number 1, Maximilian Verstappen, alleged to have breached Article 33.4 of the FIA Formula 1 sporting regulations, driver unnecessarily slowing down at 21:58, therefore impeding 1. King George Russell of Kings Lynn, Norfolk. No name, you're an absolute legend. So that's what that happened. Then at the driver's press conference, there was a cheeky interaction between George Russell of Kings Lynn, Norfolk and Maximilian Verstappen when asked about the impeding, the unnecessarily driving slow. George Russell had this to say: yeah, it did affect me, and it was a double outlap, the second of the two. And it affected me because I had to go off, and potentially it could have damaged the car. And potentially that was the 55 milliseconds that cost me the pole, potentially. When Max Verstappen was asked about the same incidents, here's what he had to say. Why didn't you just get out the way, Maximilian Verstappen? Max responded in kind this way, saying, well, where was he going to go? In front of him, there were 1, 2 or 3 cars, and they were all trying to find themselves a gap so that they could push on the lap shortly thereafter. It was Alonso in front of him. Where was he going to go? There was nothing much he could do. And he was aware that George was behind him, but he was also aware that George wasn't on a quick lap. He wasn't hot lapping. So therefore, George could have made adjustments necessarily, apparently. Everyone was about to go to bed thinking that nothing would happen. There's no way that the FIA surely would take such a pole lap away from Maximilian Verstappen for what was a trivial infringement at best. Anthony Davidson thought so. Christian Horner thought so. Nothing to see here. Much ado about nothing. And then we get Eric Van Haren tweeting out the following. Remember, for the avoidance of doubt, that all F1 journos are created equal, but some are created more equal than others. Eric Van Haren is one of the good ones, very well connected with Maximilian Verstappen. He tweeted as follows: Max Verstappen has lost pole position. He's just confirmed it. 1 spot. That's apparently possible too. So therefore, George Russell gets pole. Maximilian Verstappen will start tomorrow's Grand Prix, the Qatar Grand Prix, from 2nd place. And then we get the official FIA document, and that reads as follows: the stewards, team principal of Oracle Red Bull Racing, all in attendance. Document number 49 at time 1 a.m. in the morning, Qatar time, local time. The stewards, having received the report from the race director, summoned documents 43 and 44 and heard from the drivers and team representatives, to consider the following matter and determined the following. Driver number 1, Maximilian Verstappen, competitor, Oracle Red Bull Racing, qualifying is the session. They determined the fact is that car number 1 drove unnecessarily slow on a cool down lap. The infringement is breach of Article 33.4 of the FIA Formula 1 sporting regulations. The decision, and here's where it gets techier than techie things, ladies and gentlemen of the F1 jury. The decision is to drop of 1 grid place for the next race in which the driver participates. 1 penalty point, 2, total of 6 for the 12-month period. Oh, the humanity. Here's the reason that they've given. Gets techie. How are we here, ladies and gentlemen? It must be Johnny Herbert at the wheel, right? Here's the reason that they've given. The stewards heard from driver of car number 1, Max Verstappen, the driver of car 63, George Russell, team representatives, and reviewed positioning, marshalling system, data, video, timing, telemetry. Oh, and by the way, before I read this out, the question in the drivers' conference was pitched at George. Well, why don't you just chill out, George? George responded very cleverly and said, listen, I was just working to my deltas. Lest we forget that on each and every single lap, outlap, they've got to stick to these deltas, right? So nobody can be trundling around too slowly. It would be too dangerous, therefore. But I digress. The reason the stewards have given via their official FIA document. The stewards heard from car number 1, driver Maximilian Verstappen, and car number 63, George Russell of King's Lynn, Norfolk, team representatives, and reviewed positioning, marshal system, data, video, timing, telemetry, etc., team radio and in-car evidence. Car number 1 was on a different preparation strategy to that of car number 63. Car 1 was well past the outside of the delta, and the driver of car number 1 explained he had let cars 4 and 14 pass. The driver of car 63 claimed that he had adhered to the delta as aforementioned, and did not expect car number 1 to be on the racing line. He stated that if a car was going slow in a high-speed corner, it should not be on the racing line. Oh, the humanity. You see George Russell. You see this high-level racing IQ thing that he's paying. Mr. Politic over here. George Russell, first of his name. But I digress. The stewards regard this case as a complicated one, in that clearly car 1 did not comply with the race director's event notes and clearly was driving, in our determination, unnecessarily slowly considering the circumstance. It was obvious, therefore, that the driver of car number 1 was attempting to cool his tyres. He could also see that car 63 was approaching as he looked in his mirror multiple times whilst on the small straight between turns 11 and 12, and usually the FIA continue. This incident occurred when neither car was on a push lap. Had car 63 been on a push lap, the penalty would have most likely been the usual 3 grid position penalty. However, in mitigation of penalty, it was obvious that the driver of car 63 had clear visibility of car number 1 and that neither was on a push lap. So how were you giving out penalties then, FIA? This is chaos, Michael. Competitors are reminded, therefore, that they have the right to appeal. Bloody Nori. You know how dodgy this appeal process is. Clear, obvious, change in evidence, all this other stuff. They've got to meet that criteria. There is no appeal here. The right to appeal certain decisions of the stewards in accordance with Article 15 of the FIA International Sporting Code of Conduct and Chapter 4 of the FIA Judicial and Disciplinary Rules within the applicable time limits. Decisions of the stewards are taken independently of the FIA and are based solely on the relevant regulations, guidelines and evidence presented. Stewards in this situation: Gary Connolly, Derek Warwick, Matteo Ramiri and Amro Al-Hamad. What are we doing, ladies and gentlemen? I don't know how to react genuinely to this thing. I feel devastated. Now look, it all makes sense as I read it, but it's devastating that Maximilian Verstappen, after that god tier pole lap, will be starting tomorrow's Grand Prix. Not from the top step, from second. Front row, yeah, and still, but it's hard to understand. George Russell has, of course, made a brilliant case. Politicking, god tier level, 200 level race IQ. But yeah, and still, Maximilian Verstappen fans all around the world are going to feel anything if not persecuted, victimised even. And Maximilian Verstappen has talked about this before, right? British bias, any. It gets techie, ladies and gentlemen, particularly when you remember that Anthony Davidson had had a conversation with Christian Horner on the live internationally syndicated Sky Sports F1 broadcast and said that Maximilian Verstappen, by dint of the fact that George Russell, car number 63, was not on a push lap, he was on the second of 2 out laps. By dint of the aforementioned, it was very unlikely that the FIA stewards would find it within their jurisdiction that it was suitable to give Maximilian Verstappen a penalty, but they have done. Again, for the avoidance of doubt, Max Verstappen, penalised to the tune of 1 place, won't start tomorrow's Grand Prix, Qatar Grand Prix, from pole. He will be starting from 2nd place. George Russell has been promoted to pole. Oh, the humanity. What are we doing here?